We always believed that deep space was silence, that beyond the edge of human reach, there was nothing but the hum of machinery and the occasional sigh of solar wind. But Xerion Theta was the first to scream. The signal came like a whisper, coded and ancient, buried beneath electromagnetic storms in forgotten centuries. A derelict spacecraft, unregistered, unresponsive, was caught drifting near a star that should have collapsed a billion years ago. The craft bore no nation, no symbol, only a scorched nameplate with a language even our AI couldn't decipher. We sent an exploration vessel, the Vigilant Mercy, with a team of exolinguists, historians, and one reluctant captain whose past was tied too closely to the unknown. As we approached, time began to act strangely, clocks lagged, memories blurred, and every crew member reported hearing faint echoes in their dreams, hymns sung by voices not of this world. What terrified us wasn't the anomaly, or the vessel, or the dying star. It was that the derelict wasn't truly empty. Sensors showed no movement, no life forms, yet energy pulses surged from within, in perfect rhythm, like a heartbeat. I remember standing on the observation deck, the stars burning cold around me, and for the first time, I understood that silence is not absence. It's restraint. And something inside that ship was holding back. The universe had not gone quiet. It had been taught to whisper. And we had just leaned too close. We had come looking for answers. But instead, we found the question that the cosmos itself had buried deep inside its bones: what sings when all light dies? The airlock resisted our entry, not mechanically, but unnaturally, like the void itself had learned to clutch with invisible fingers. As the seal gave way with a bone-deep groan, a vacuum didn't greet us. Instead, we stepped into pressurized silence. That should have been impossible. No reactor readings, no oxygen reserves, no thermal signatures, and yet, breathable air lingered like something exhaled recently. We moved slowly, our helmet beams barely piercing through the ink-thick interior, our radios laced with static that sounded almost rhythmic. The ship's corridors were serpentine, more organic than engineered, as though the architecture had grown into its shape rather than been designed. Walls pulsed faintly, not with light, but with memory. Pictographs etched into their surfaces shifted when no one looked directly at them, scenes of a civilization spiraling inward upon itself, singing as it died. One by one, the crew started to feel it, the weight. Not gravity, but emotion. Dr. Lyra, the linguist, wept for no reason. It's grief, she whispered. The air is saturated with it. Others reported hearing voices, some singing, others begging, and some calling them by name. Names that weren't on any manifest. Captain Idrin kept his composure, but I saw the tremor in his hand as he traced his fingers along a bulkhead engraved with what looked like a choir of humanoids with no mouths. Why build a ship to carry only echoes, he muttered. We pressed on. Deeper. Past bulkheads sealed by bone-like resin. Past rooms that looked like sanctuaries and slaughterhouses at once. Then we reached what we thought was the bridge. There was no control panel, no screens, only a pedestal of crystal, and around it, 12 figures suspended midair, unmoving. Not dead. Not alive. Cocooned in a shimmer that defied our instruments. Lyra collapsed. Screaming. They're singing in reverse, she cried, convulsing. Their language is made of unmaking. We couldn't move her. We couldn't move ourselves. The ship had begun to breathe. Not metaphorically, literally. The walls expanded and contracted. A hum grew louder, not in our ears, but in our minds. Then we heard it. A phrase repeated over and over in a tongue older than time. And though no translator could parse it, we all understood: you have entered the hymn of extinction. And now, we were part of its verse. When the crystal ignited, it wasn't with light but with memory, vivid and suffocating. Our helmet visors blurred, but the vision wasn't optical, it was cognitive, internal, like a memory forced upon us by something that knew exactly how to break us open. Each of us witnessed a different past, but not our own. I saw cities of obsidian spires and twin moons carved with hymns, a civilization that didn't build technology, they grew it, birthed it from sentient minerals and sonic blueprints. They were called the Cerithians, and their language wasn't spoken. It was sung into being. Every decision, every law, every war, every child born manifested through harmonic resonance, a sacred act of reality shaping through sound. And then came the silence. A note that could not be sung. A frequency that erased the frequencies around it. They described it not as an enemy but as an idea too old for creation. Something that had always existed, waiting for voices to rise high enough to notice it. The 12 floating beings were the last of their kind archivists, chosen not to escape, but to remember. But their choir had become corrupted, their harmonics inverted by the very silence they tried to outrun. The pedestal didn't house a command, it housed their final note, the one that should never be sung. Lyra began reciting alien verses in perfect pitch, her eyes rolling into white as though she were a tuning fork struck by a god's hand. Idrin reached for her, but she screamed, "Don't break the chorus!" And suddenly we realized the ship was waiting. Waiting for more voices. For more minds to complete the song. The air vibrated with purpose. We heard our own heartbeats syncing with an unknown rhythm, as though we were being tuned to some terrible chord. I felt it digging into my memories, finding my grief, my guilt, shaping my pain into melody. A voice not my own spoke through me. They died singing because silence was deaf. Idrin shouted for evacuation, but our shuttle had vanished. Not destroyed, vanished from every sensor, every scan, as if it had never existed. We were now part of the instrument. This wasn't a ship. It was a choir, adrift between galaxies, collecting verses from species like a dirge that never ends. And we had just been drafted into its final stanza. As the pulse deepened and the crystal dimmed, the walls began to liquefy not with moisture, but with a viscous shimmer of thought and recollection. Panels of what we had believed to be metallic alloy folded inward like petals, revealing a tunnel lined with thousands of floating orbs, memory spheres, orbiting in perfect synchronization, like the neurons of a dying brain preserving its last flashes of life. Idrin led us forward, though I saw in his gait a falter, like gravity had turned personal for him alone. Every step pulled at our minds, each orb whispering fragments, each memory not shown but injected. I remember touching the first sphere, a flicker, a vision, an alien child floating in a void classroom, learning through harmonics, her face unraveling into choral code. I stumbled back gasping, but no one else noticed. They were all locked in, hypnotized by the stories pressing against their skulls. Dr. Varen collapsed against the wall, his eyes leaking blood. "It's not just memories," he rasped. "They're wounds. Because these weren't records, they were remnants of suffering." Each orb a final cry, a last note sung into existence as civilizations collapsed into oblivion. Not just Cerithians. Others too. Species we had never encountered, never named. Some built of gas and flame, others of ice and fractal bone, all had come here, all had sung, and all had vanished. The ship wasn't adrift. It was on pilgrimage, its path not charted by coordinates, but by sorrow. And we had arrived not by chance, but by resonance. We matched its frequency. We were mourners long before we boarded. Lyra stood beneath a cluster of spheres, chanting softly, her voice merging with their frequency. "They're asking us to finish it," she said. "Their verses are incomplete." I wanted to scream at her, pull her back, but I couldn't move. Because I realized I was doing the same, whispering to the sphere before me, letting it take my memories, offering it my pain like a hymn. Idrin fired his weapon at the orbs, and they shattered, but instead of debris, silence poured out like vapor, filling the corridor, compressing our thoughts into static. The spheres weren't just memories. They were prisons. And when we broke them, we released what had been stored, not voices, but silence that remembers. The ship began to tremble. Not from damage, but from anticipation. We had stirred something. And whatever it was listening now. Listening, and preparing to respond. We descended into the core not by ladders or lifts, but through a spiraling descent of gravity-warped air, where space itself folded inward like the eye of a storm dreaming in reverse. The laws of time frayed as we entered. Our steps echoed before we made them. Our voices lagged behind our thoughts. Varen, barely conscious, muttered, "This place isn't made for linear beings." The chamber below was cathedral-like, vast, impossible, a void filled with visible strands of light suspended in the air like threads of frozen lightning, each one looping and intersecting, mimicking the structure of something that could only be called a timeline in agony. Some strands blinked and vanished. Others surged and hummed like they were alive. In the center of it all stood what looked like an altar, no stone, no metal, but a gravity well that bent light inward, creating a sphere of perfect shadow. We watched as Lyra approached it, her eyes glazed in a shimmer we had not seen before. Like her pupils were refracting the memory light around us. She placed her hand near the gravity sphere and whispered a word that none of us recognized, and yet all of us felt its meaning: listen. And the ship obeyed. The chamber trembled, not in fear, not in violence, but like a choir adjusting itself for its grandest verse. The strands began to hum. And in those hums, we saw our own pasts playing backward, our childhoods, our regrets, our unspoken fears made visible in shimmering loops. Then they converged. Not just ours, but the memories of entire species, converging toward a singular, climactic chord. Idrin stepped back, trembling. "They're rewriting timelines," he muttered. "Not remembering. Rehearsing. Because the ship wasn't storing history. It was editing it. Every memory orb, every silence fragment, it was shaping them, tuning them, like movements in a requiem still being composed. And now it was using us to resolve the unfinished finale. Our DNA, our traumas, our voices were being woven into its last act. We weren't explorers anymore. We were instruments. We were sheet music. And if we failed to harmonize, the song would collapse. Not just for us. For the galaxy. For time itself. I tried to scream, to run, to sever the strand wrapping around my wrist like a pulse, but it was inside me now. It knew my key. My resonance. And I could feel the ship asking one question over and over: will you become the verse that ends the silence, or the silence that ends the song? The chamber dimmed as the hums faltered into trembling pauses, like an orchestra losing faith mid-symphony. That's when we heard it, the first silence that wasn't passive. It pressed. It crawled into our skulls, filling the gaps between breaths. A fissure formed in the hull above us, not a tear of structural fatigue, but a deliberate unveiling, as if the ship had decided it was time we saw what waited beyond. What should have been a view of stars was now a swirling maelstrom of blackness, deeper than space, textured like liquid thought. But this void wasn't still. Stars at the edge of our vision blinked, one by one gone, not collapsed, not exploded, just undone. Like someone was erasing them with an ancient brush dipped in entropy. "It's broadcasting," Varen gasped, clutching his temples. Not outward, to something older than the stars. The realization dropped like a stone into my chest: the ship was a beacon. Not to send warning, not to seek rescue, but to signal readiness. A hymn constructed from civilization's final cries, harmonized into a single irresistible chorus. We had finished its verse. We had added the missing element, ourselves. And now the ship had begun the transmission. Idrin tried to overload his suit's power core, hoping to destabilize the chamber's gravity matrix. But the ship simply absorbed it, converted his intention into rhythm. "It's not a machine," Lyra whispered, her voice trembling like a plucked string. "It's a composer. And we've given it a final stanza." We looked back up and saw the strands of time unraveling, not just in the chamber but within us. Varen aged 20 years in a heartbeat. Lyra reverted to a child and back again. Idrin vanished for 3 whole minutes, reappearing sobbing and scarred with symbols none of us recognized. The breach in the hull widened, and we saw it, something colossal in the dark, coiling through the void like a chorus incarnate. It wasn't a creature. It was a song given shape. Its body pulsed with verses. Its eyes, if they were eyes, shone with ancient staves of unwritten endings. The stars it passed didn't die. They fell silent. The hymn had summoned it. And we were the offering it required to complete its arrival. The ship quivered in ecstasy. The choir was now in full voice. And somewhere within that unholy harmony, I could hear my own heartbeat beginning to echo back, but not in sync. The rhythm had changed. The universe wasn't listening anymore. It was singing back. And it had learned our names. We descended into the core not by ladders or lifts, but through a spiraling descent of gravity-warped air, where space itself folded inward like the eye of a storm dreaming in reverse. The laws of time frayed as we entered. Our steps echoed before we made them. Our voices lagged behind our thoughts. Varen, barely conscious, muttered, "This place isn't made for linear beings." The chamber below was cathedral-like, vast, impossible, a void filled with visible strands of light suspended in the air like threads of frozen lightning, each one looping and intersecting, mimicking the structure of something that could only be called a timeline in agony. Some strands blinked and vanished. Others surged and hummed like they were alive. In the center of it all stood what looked like an altar, no stone, no metal, but a gravity well that bent light inward, creating a sphere of perfect shadow. We watched as Lyra approached it, her eyes glazed in a shimmer we had not seen before. Like her pupils were refracting the memory light around us. She placed her hand near the gravity sphere and whispered a word that none of us recognized, and yet all of us felt its meaning: "Listen." And the ship obeyed. The chamber trembled, not in fear, not in violence, but like a choir adjusting itself for its grandest verse. The strands began to hum. And in those hums, we saw our own pasts playing backward, our childhoods, our regrets, our unspoken fears made visible in shimmering loops. Then they converged. Not just ours, but the memories of entire species, converging toward a singular, climactic chord. Idrin stepped back, trembling. "They're rewriting timelines," he muttered. "Not remembering. Rehearsing. Because the ship wasn't storing history. It was editing it. Every memory orb, every silence fragment, it was shaping them, tuning them, like movements in a requiem still being composed. And now it was using us to resolve the unfinished finale. Our DNA, our traumas, our voices were being woven into its last act. We weren't explorers anymore. We were instruments. We were sheet music. And if we failed to harmonize, the song would collapse. Not just for us. For the galaxy. For time itself. I tried to scream, to run, to sever the strand wrapping around my wrist like a pulse, but it was inside me now. It knew my key. My resonance. And I could feel the ship asking one question over and over: will you become the verse that ends the silence, or the silence that ends the song? The moment my voice faded into breath, the vessel exhaled, not with air, but with essence, dissolving in strands of shimmering resonance that peeled away like morning mist under the first light of a newborn sun. It wasn't destruction. It was completion. The entity, the song-shaped, grief-born intelligence that had responded to the derelict's final call, rose upward into the collapsing starscape, cradling the ship's memory within its endless form like a choir lifting a last note to the rafters of time itself. It didn't consume us. It absorbed what we offered: sorrow, fear, beauty, unfinished dreams, and silence laced with meaning. Around us, the black between the stars fractured, not into nothingness, but into voice. Layers upon layers of other songs, civilizations long thought lost, surfaced in luminous echo, threading themselves into the final harmony. We were no longer alone. They had never been gone. They had simply become notes in this eternal requiem. Varen vanished, his body drifting upward in arcs of color, a soundless farewell. Idrin saluted nothing, everything, his eyes reflecting galaxies reborn. Lyra, she was still singing, her voice now part of something much larger, stretching far beyond her human frame. I stood in the center of what remained, watching time collapse inward, not destructively, but gently, like pages of a story being folded shut after the final word has been read. Then the stars stopped blinking. Not in fear. Not in death. But in harmony. The void was no longer empty. It was filled with memory, wrapped in melody, and lit with echoes that would never fade. Our ship was gone. Our mission had ended. But something greater had begun. The entity disappeared into the rift it had come from, trailing behind it a chord so vast, so ancient, it could only be felt by listening with the soul. I don't know how I survived. Perhaps it left one verse unfinished. Perhaps that verse is me. I float now, in orbit above what used to be silence, surrounded by stars that sing softly, eternally. And I understand now. We never discovered an alien song. We remembered it. We carried it all along, buried in our fears, in our longing. The hymn of extinction was never about death. It was about being heard before fading. And at last, we were heard.